Good morning. I don't think of myself as a Californian. In Britain, I think of myself as somebody who's gone native but keeps an American accent. So if you could just for a moment reimagine me as a British person with a lot of gauche American habits, then it probably makes more sense. I only have a few minutes to talk, so I'd just like to make one point, and that is about the impact of the digital world on entrepreneurship. And I think the only point to make this morning concerns leapfrogging. Leapfrogging is this notion that sometimes new technologies and innovations permit or cause groups or societies to jump over each other without ever passing through the same evolution. So, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, over the last 20 years, even though there is a lack of fixed-line telephony, the introduction of mobile phones permitted the penetration of telephony without ever having to pass through the same level of technology evolution that Western nations passed through, and we now have a density of people connected through telephony in emerging nations that did not have to go through the huge cost and infrastructure of digging cables, of laying cables and digging holes. That's leapfrogging. What I'm interested in is where the next leapfrogging is going to happen, not where it already has happened. And I would assert that there's two places in particular, and that they both relate to entrepreneurship generally and the challenge for Europe specifically. The first area of leapfrogging has to come in the area of education, and the second is in the area of access to finance. And the reason they're both so relevant to entrepreneurs is the largest stumbling blocks for people starting businesses are a lack of knowledge and a lack of money. The most observed issue is the lack of money. The most important issue is the lack of knowledge. So I started a social organization some 7 years ago called the School for Startups. We're a modest-sized organization. We operate, as was mentioned, in the UK, but also in Eastern Europe and in Africa, and starting this year in Latin America. And over the last 7 years, we've taught or helped about 40,000 people to start their own businesses. And out of that practice has come a number of observations. The first one is that teaching still requires people talking to people in close proximity, meaning the internet does not substitute for live education. And that's a very important point. If you think of education historically, it was largely in broadcast format. I teach, you listen. It's not a current form of education at all. And if you're trying to teach somebody a practice, how to do something, sort of the teaching of how is not best done by a lecture. There's elements that can be lectured, but more of it is best done through Socratic method, through a question and answer period between the teacher and the student, where the student is challenged and forced to adopt and internalize what they're learning. And the internet is pretty bad at that. I've tried over and over again, as have many. Yet, at the same time, what the web does permit in a way that live teaching does not permit is patience and the teaching of mastery. And what I mean by that, I'll use an example. So a guy by the name of Saul Khan started something called the Khan Academy in California 4 or 5 years ago now. Saul's a really interesting fellow. He started by teaching his nieces and nephews how to do math so they could do better on their standardized tests, because he was unmarried and he came from a large American Asian family where it was considered his uncle responsibility to teach his niece and nephews how to do better in math. But as they were not in the same town, he started to do it using YouTube, and he created short lessons. From that very inauspicious start, he has now founded probably the most important math teaching institution in the world. The Khan Academy is now regularly teaching millions of people around the globe mastery in mathematics. Millions. Rising to tens of millions at the pace it's growing. What he observed and what he then crystallized into practice was this notion of micro-teaching and mastery. This is particularly useful in mathematics because it is a buildable knowledge. You have to know a basic concept to be able to use and learn a more advanced concept. Therefore, you shouldn't advance to a more advanced concept until you have actually mastered the basic concept. The way people use the Khan Academy is they take micro lessons. A 4-minute lesson, a 3-minute lesson, a 5-minute lesson, and then they test themselves on it until they have internalized the lesson. There is no teacher in the world who is patient enough to put up with that style of teaching. We would wear our teachers down if they were forced to teach this way. And yet the web is infinitely patient. It's not conscious. It's just sitting there letting people do things over and over again as they choose. And therefore the web in this way is an improvement on live teaching, because people can acquire mastery at their own pace. And the Khan Academy has simply demonstrated how to do it. Why is this important? Well, I'll tell you why it's important, because I'm going to imagine for you for a moment a company that hasn't started yet and tell you what track it's going to take. It's a company started by a pair of 15-year-olds who are 15 today. And they currently live somewhere. And you know what's interesting about it? It makes no difference where. And those 15-year-olds will have learned on the Khan Academy and on some other websites that teach coding the same way, both mathematics and how to code. And in 3 years, they're going to go to university. But as there's no university in their town, they're going to go to an online university presented by a MOOC, which is a massive open online course. MOOCs are growing. The largest MOOCs are in the United States, though they try to reach globally. And MOOCs do not yet really work, not in a traditional degree environment. The two biggest are edX and Coursera, and each one is trying to be a horseless carriage. That is, they're trying to replicate the old world online. And it's only kind of working. But out of nowhere last year, a completely obscure university called the University of South New Hampshire, a university I'm confident no one has heard of, became one of the 50 fastest growing companies in the US. They did what other, more prestigious universities were adverse to do. They created a series of curricula that permitted you to get an accredited degree completely online. They assumed perhaps 5,000 people would sign up. 50,000 signed up, and this is not cheap. This is American-style tuition fees. Admittedly, part of their value proposition is they were cheaper than a proper university, probably appropriately so, and yet they were still expensive in any objective measure. 50,000 people paid $25,000 a year. These are not trivial sums. There is a pent-up demand. What happens if it cost $1? How many would sign up then? We are within 3 years of a massive explosion of accredited university-level degrees being available on a global basis. We're not 20 years out. We're 36 months out, possibly 24 months. School for Startups is going to be offering a master's in entrepreneurship this autumn and a digital, i.e. online one, in 2015. We're one of who knows how many people who woke up and smelled University of South New Hampshire and said if they can do it, anyone can do it, without disrespect to the University of South New Hampshire. So these two students who are 15 today and 18 in 3 years will have access to an accredited degree and will take that degree. And 4 years later, that's putting them now at 22 or 21, and us 7 years out, we'll start a software company or a web company, or much more likely, a company based on creative content, which I shall come back to. And this company they start, and I have no idea what it will do. I can't forecast the future. Will not need money. None at all. Because what they will do is they will raise their money by obtaining prepayments from their customers through either Kickstarter or Indiegogo or another crowdfunding site that does not require the release of equity and therefore requires no legal engagement with a global customer base. If you think this is an unlikely trend, you need to look at the numbers. Kickstarter and Indiegogo between them have put more than $1 billion into the pockets of people starting projects and businesses around the world. The largest and fastest fundraising in the world have now happened on these two websites. Now think about what this means. It means that you can be educated and start a business and fund your business, all the key milestones of entrepreneurship, and never touch any traditional mechanism in the world. Those are the ingredients for leapfrogging. Innovation is democratic. innovation spread as far as the internet spreads, and the internet, as Eduardo completely compulsively said, is mobile. We don't really care whether there is a line attached to us. We care whether we're fed fast enough, period. If the speeds are there, we're done. And we do not need any greater speed than the mild speeds we have today to accomplish all the things I've just described. So we don't need vast tectonic plates to move for the future to arrive. The future's already here. It's just unevenly distributed. And so we have to ask ourselves, and by the way, I just quoted William Gibson. I didn't make that up. All my best lines are always from someone else. I just saw somebody writing it down thinking, oh my God, that was such a good comment. I realized, no, I plagiarized. To my point, it is interesting to me when I look at the challenges, for example, my own organization faces in trying to scale to reach larger communities, what we can do better and more of. So we work on access to finance. We teach people how not to need a bank, how not to need a government grant, how not to need a social loan, and how not to need venture capital. Anybody who thinks that venture capital is the future and you need more of it is mired in trying to figure out how to get your horseless carriage to use a buggy whip. Venture capital is a vastly outmoded and inefficient mechanism for the distribution of capital to the greatest innovation. If you look at the marginal returns of venture capital, the top decile of venture firms have made 98% of all the returns, and they are all within 10 miles of Sand Hill Road. There is no democratization of venture capital because venture capital itself is a semi-broken system. It works on too slow a cycle. The average length of a fund is 10 years. The world changes in 10 years, and it changes at a much faster half-life than 10 years. The amount of money that is going to be put through non-equity crowdfunding sites in 5 years from now will be greater than the sum of all money invested in venture capital. The lines are already crossing. And as an entrepreneur, you give up none of your company, which is an incredibly compelling statement. There are others, more complex reasons why these things are happening. But the reason today that I'm interested in it is because I think that the convergence, the flipping of education, thus giving many people the opportunity to learn in ways they could not before to a highly accredited level, plus access to finance that itself is speedily moving beyond normal confines of capital, are going to continue to cause a revolution in entrepreneurship. And as we started this morning, entrepreneurship is not beneficial to innovation. It is, in fact, the seeding of innovation. Innovation without entrepreneurship is not innovation. Innovation is the act of doing something new and different upon the world, and the vehicle for moving that new invention into the world is entrepreneurship. The reason young companies create all the new jobs is because the young company need the people because they have the demands of growth that come from having created a new unfair advantage by a new compelling innovation that disrupts an existing market. They don't create jobs, they need people. They're not out there to create jobs. They're out there to change the world. And in the result of changing the world is that they create new jobs. Thus, when we measure jobs, we're measuring an artifact, not a cause. Innovation itself has no means of execution in the absence of entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurship is predicated on education and finance. Thus, the challenge for Europe, the challenge for the UK, which is absolutely a part of Europe, and so long as us immigrants continue to vote for it, will remain a part of Europe, is that we ourselves are somewhat sclerotic. We are using modes and modalities of education and finance that do not relate to the new world. I'm beginning a program this autumn in Colombia, and I can depressingly say that the Colombian government's acts and activities in support of entrepreneurship make all of us look very modest in Europe, and that simply should not be the case. The pace of change, the willingness, and it's because of leapfrogging. They don't start from the presumption that they know what they're doing. They don't start from the presumption that things are all right. They start with a very fierce urgency of now, knowing that things are not all right, and feeling a hunger to catch up And therefore, they look for the newest, most available way to solve unsolved problems. And what they grab are leapfrogging technologies and opportunities, and therefore, as a direct consequence, put themselves in front. And that's our challenge. It's the challenge of everyone else desiring to accomplish new and innovative things, and to do so in new and innovative ways. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doug. I said in the beginning that entrepreneurship was underappreciated in the importance of innovation, but I think you absolutely pointed out how crucial it is, and I'm very grateful for that. And it was actually the perfect segue to our final speaker this morning, and that is Anne-Marie Imafidon, the founder of Stemettes, an organization based in the UK that aims to inspire the next generation of females into science, technology, engineering, and math. And Anne-Marie, in preparing for this session, I really have to say I struggled a little bit with your introduction, because how do you introduce a child prodigy who, by all accounts, is one of the world's smartest people? Listen to what I have to say. You hold the current world record for the youngest girl ever to pass A-level computing at age 11. At 13, you received a scholarship to study math at Johns Hopkins University. At 17, you started your master's at Oxford University, graduating at age 19, the youngest ever graduate with a master's degree. But in addition to all of your scholarly achievements, you're of course an entrepreneur in your own right, as well as a very prominent voice of the so-called millennial generation, also known as Generation Y. We know, of course, from this generation that it is one of digital natives. You've grown up with these digital technologies. And unlike me, who is very much a digital immigrant, sadly, so what are your thoughts about this debate, and what do you make out of all of this?